we look at DuPont's studies. Back in 2007, DuPont did a number of studies where they looked at their genetically engineered corn and soy, and the ability of that to convert glyphosate sprayed on their crops, the ability of it to be converted to N-acetylglyphosate, which is considered non-toxic. However, what they didn't take into consideration is that the N-acetylglyphosate is also an amino acid analog of glycine, and it can be deacetylated into glyphosate and then participate in biology, in protein synthesis. Well, what they did was radio-labeled studies in the animal tissues, and they found that that they weren't getting all of the glyphosate out of the animal proteins during extraction, so that they could quantify how much glyphosate was in the animal tissues. They found that that there was still radio-labeled carbon that was giving them a signal, and it wasn't coming out, it wasn't being seen in the extraction. So what they did was they used proteolytic enzymes, which is what we use in the laboratory, to separate amino acids that are joined together in proteins. In order to separate amino acids in proteins, you use proteolytic enzymes. And the amino acids come apart, and then you can identify them individually. Well, that's just what DuPont did. They used proteolytic enzymes, and they ran these, I think it was around 30 degrees centigrade, 25 degrees centigrade, some 30 degrees centigrade, I guess. And they ran them for in excess of 24 hours. Several days to begin with. And they found that glyphosate was separating from the proteins now. And they were able to detect it separated from the protein. They weren't able to quantify it significantly because the levels were so low. But they still show that it was part of the protein. Now, when I analyzed animal bones from pigs and cows and looked at other forms of gelatin, I found that there were significant quantities of glyphosate contained in gelatin. Gelatin is partially hydrolyzed collagen. The only way that glyphosate can get into the gelatin, into the collagen, is, as I said, it has to go through the bloodstream, into the capillary, enter the extracellular matrix, pass through the cell wall, be picked up by the RNA, assembled into collagen, and excreted by the cell. So that glyphosate becomes part of proteins in biology happens. This is factual. This is something that Monsanto and the Environmental Protection Agency never considered. And now, the significance of this becoming part of protein, now this is how glyphosate causes disease and dysfunction, and how it could cause the rise in virtually every modern disease that we've seen, and that Stephanie and I have discussed in previous papers. This is how it happens. It's not the toxicity of glyphosate that's dangerous. Glyphosate is relatively non-toxic. It's the fact that glyphosate becomes part of our biology. It becomes part of protein structure, causing misfolded proteins. And it's the amino acids determine the structure of the proteins, and they also determine how the protein will fold. And that determines the function of the protein. So now, you're ordering up glycine and you're not getting it. You're substituting glyphosate, which is an analog of glycine, and now it's causing a structurally different protein. Now, what does that mean for collagen? seeing that there's many collagen diseases, like scleroderma is a disease of collagen that can be easily explained through glyphosate. What does that mean for collagen? It means that it's going to produce a structurally different collagen, a collagen that's inferior for the purpose that it was designed and intended to be used. Now, that means that the elasticity of our tissues changes because glyphosate enters the fibrous protein elastin as well as collagen. Fibronectin is also affected. Laminin is also affected. These are structural proteins besides collagen that make up the extracellular matrix. They're all affected by misincorporation of glyphosate for glycine. Now, this changes the tensile strength of these polymers. It changes the burst strength. It's like what happened to you with your, what was it, your aorta.
Right.
That could have, that structural protein that forms the aorta, that could have burst because there was inferior elastin and collagen. There was a degradation of those proteins, and I guarantee that it was potentially glyphosate that in your diet that caused this. This has become a big problem in Western society with rotator cuff injury, with people's knees and hips and joints going. The collagen is inferior. When glyphosate enters collagen and elastin and these connective proteins, it makes them inferior and subject to failure. Additionally, the phosphonate group of glyphosate can institute apoptosis. It can institute the death of the cell. Now, this is serious because this is exactly what Monsanto found in the mice and rats, which the pathologist noted, was that there was destruction of the basement membranes and the extracellular matrix surrounding the cells, and eventually taking out the cells. And there were spaces that were being noted in the tissues of the glands and organs. The pathologist noted that every gland and organ were the interstitial spaces were growing. That there was less material there. There was structural damage to the glands and organs, and that's based on collagen. These are collagen diseases. It's like with the lungs, with the increase in COPD today that we see. That involves collagen and elastin. There's a lot of elastin in our lungs, so that they can expand and be flexible. Well, when you substitute glyphosate for the glycine in elastin and the collagens of these tissues, they're more rigid, they're thicker, and they eventually lead to failure and fibrosis. And this leads to COPD.
What is COPD? What is COPD?
COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it's a severe, debilitating disease where you lose lung function. You lose the surface area within the lungs for oxygenation, and the tissues become fibrotic and deteriorate, and your forced expiratory volume decreases. Instead of 100% forced expiratory volume, your ability to get air out of your lungs, that goes down and down and down it's because the lungs lose elasticity. This is caused by glyphosate. The increase that we see in lung disease today particularly is caused by glyphosate in the diet. It's a huge problem in America, and in Canada, and in Western society.
I have another
and it's
question.
based on glycine getting nixed for glyphosate. Now, how do I know that glyphosate winds up in the lungs? From Monsanto's radiolabeled studies. They found glyphosate in the tissues, in all tissues, including the lungs. They also found that some glyphosate is metabolized. And when it's metabolized, it was broken down into other metabolites. One of the metabolites that was released was carbon dioxide. There was a small amount of radioactive carbon dioxide that was exhaled from the lungs. It was delivered from the bloodstream, exchanged in the lungs, and it escaped with the expired air, which they collected and determined the amount of radioactive carbon dioxide from the metabolization of some of the glyphosate. So glyphosate is not just incorporated as an amino acid into proteins, but some of it is metabolized. Not much, but some. Glyphosate behaves like other amino acids. It behaves like, it's capable of incorporating into protein synthesis. Let me give you a couple of more examples, which I think you'll find very, very interesting. Our amino acid proline. Our amino acid proline has an analog called BMAA. That's beta N methylamino N alanine. Now this particular amino acid, it comes from cyanobacteria, from algae blooms. Oh. And it's considered a toxin. It's linked to ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. Now there's another one of our amino acids, L-arginine. There's an analog of L-arginine called L-cannabinine, and this is produced as a defense toxin by leguminous plants, like members of the pea family, and it's a defense toxin against herbivores eating it.
Okay. It
affects their biology. It incorporates into their proteins, the same as BMAA incorporates into the proteins and causes disease. L-cannabinine also misincorporates into protein structure. Now there's another one, glufosinate, the herbicide. Well, our amino acid, glutamic acid, is one of our main amino acids, and its analog, structural analog, is glufosinate, which is also called phosphenothricin. Now this is a toxin that is produced by species of Streptomyces, soil bacteria, and it's an herbicide. It's been commercialized as glufosinate herbicide. They have an ammonium salt of glufosinate that they use to kill plants, just like glyphosate. This also can misincorporate. It can take the place of glutamic acid and glutamine. And glufosinate is a neurological toxin. It can cause severe neurological damage, just like glyphosate can. So it's not that there's just one of these non-coding amino acids. There are numerous non-coding amino acids that cause disease. But to take glyphosate, a synthetic non-coding amino acid, and put it into everything you eat, so that every meal, 3 times a day, you are ingesting glyphosate, you are destroying biology. You're killing yourself. You're killing your family, your children. Glyphosate. Go ahead, Tony.
I have a question. We are, I presume, correct me if I'm wrong, all the time ingesting, eating, drinking, and breathing stuff, including organisms that might be harmful pathogens, and we have, I presume, some sort of a immune system that protects us from unwanted elements getting into our body. So how come glyphosate or glyphosate is not singled out and destroyed or kept out by our immune system or by our RNA or what have you? Why not?
Well, first of all, these are amino acids.
Okay.
And our biology recognizes them as amino acids. There is no mechanism in our biology for excluding these amino acids, because we were not to come in contact with these. These are glyphosate is a synthetic amino acid. We weren't to come in contact with these.
Oh, I mean, in the evolutionary history of life, so many billion years, there was no glyphosate, and therefore our system did not have to find a way to distinguish it from glycine, and that's why we cannot, and our body cannot distinguish, and it picks up the wrong one if it is available, right?
Basically, if glyphosate is available, if the RNA when it's constructing the protein and glyphosate happens to be there, and glycine, it'll pick up glyphosate first because of its electrical value. It has a stronger electrical potential, so it'll get picked up and preferred over glycine. If it's not there, it won't get picked up. So it's random. It's chaotic.
In other words,
when glyphosate enters the organism,
in other words, it shines more than... It
creates biological chaos.
In layman's terms, it shines, electrically speaking, more than glycine, and that's why the body picks it up, because it's more visible than the other one.
Basically, yeah, that's kind of a simple way to put it, yeah.
Okay.
So getting back to the extracellular matrix, to summarize the extracellular matrix, that's the insoluble complex of proteins and carbohydrates. This is on slide number 7.
Okay.
It's the insoluble complex of proteins and carbohydrates that form the ECM. It's secreted by our cells, and it self-assembles outside of the cell surrounding our cells. The proteins that form it include collagens and the adhesion, not just collagens, but also elastin, which we mentioned to give elasticity to the tissues, and the adhesion proteins, which include fibronectin and laminin. You can see that fibronectin has been associated with pathologies including cancer and fibrosis. Like fibronectin, laminins are another high molecular weight protein of the extracellular matrix. They are a major component of the basal lamina, a protein network foundation for most of the cells and organs. These comprise the basement membrane. Monsanto pathologists noted frequent destruction of the basement membranes. Also, part of the extracellular matrix within the structure will find carbohydrates, and these carbohydrates include proteoglycans and glycosaminoglycans. That's the filler substance that regulates the movement of molecules through the extracellular matrix, and it affects the stability and the activity in signaling that occurs through the matrix. Now, you might envision the extracellular matrix as completely going from our body, from head to toe, outside of our cells, and you might liken it to a solid-state circuit. You get an electric signal here, and it's instantly goes through the circuit. Well, that's what happens within the extracellular matrix. We're electrical beings, and the electrical signals are instantly transmitted through our matrix, through our nervous system. So you get a cut on your toe, you bang your toe, you feel it up here in the brain instantly. It's instant signaling. And this is all a function of the extracellular matrix. Remember that your nerve endings end in the extracellular matrix, along with your capillaries, for your blood vessels. The capillary ends. Capillary ends, the nerve ending ends in the extracellular matrix. So the extracellular matrix controls is very, very important to our biology. And glyphosate disrupts the extracellular matrix. This is what makes glyphosate so dangerous as a synthetic amino acid, an analog of glycine. This is what makes it so dangerous. We can go to slide number 8. Let's see, glycine is an amino acid and precursor of our protein structure that makes us who we are. It's used in the construct of peptides and proteins. It's a major structural component of our cells. 25% of our amino acid, which forms collagen, the main structural protein of the extracellular matrix in our connective tissue. Collagen is the most abundant protein in our biology. It makes up approximately 25% to 30% of our body's protein. Our connective tissues, tendons, ligaments, skin, corneas, cartilage, bones, blood vessels, gut, invertebrate discs, the dentin of our teeth depend on collagen. Now, some of the lab work that I've done looking at collagen, as I said, I've looked at collagen, bovine and porcine collagens, and found them ubiquitously contaminated by glyphosate. So I decided that I would follow the collagen and the gelatin that we extract from collagen. I'd follow that into the food supply. Gelatin is used in many, many products that we eat and are exposed to daily. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The gummies, the gummy vitamins that parents give children, and even adult vitamins. They're gummies like chewable candies, like jelly beans. Those are primarily gelatin. So I analyzed those in the lab, and I found that Disney gummy vitamins contained glyphosate contamination. The Flintstones gummy vitamins contained glyphosate contamination. What else did I find? Knox gelatin that people use to make desserts. That was contaminated. Jello, the dessert. There's always room for Jello. Jello, gelatin. It's contaminated with glyphosate. I found 9 parts per billion of glyphosate contained in Jello. Also in Power Max protein powder. It's an advanced nutrition formula. I found almost 15 parts per billion glyphosate in the protein powder that people take for their health. They're ingesting the gelatin, which is contaminated with glyphosate. Now, you might say, well, there'll be some that view this video that'll say, well, it's only parts per billion. That doesn't mean anything. Well, let me put this into perspective. I calculated that 1 part per billion contains, let's see, what do I have here?
1 part per billion of what into what?
1 part per billion of glyphosate
Into what?
into molecules.
Okay.
In other words, how many molecules are contained in 1 part per billion of glyphosate? In 1 part per billion, there are 3.561 trillion molecules.
Okay.
Okay? 3.5 trillion molecules of glyphosate in 1 part per billion. And each one of those molecules can disrupt a protein.
Is that 1 part per billion in kilograms or grams or what?
That's 1 part per billion in a kilogram.
Okay. Okay.
Each one of those molecules can be misincorporated into a protein and change its character, change its structure, cause it to misfold, cause it to misfunction. So now Monsanto found that out of the radio-labeled dose that they gave the rats in the study, they found that up to about 1% of the dose bioaccumulated. And if you look at our last paper and paper number 4, in paper number 4 you can see the statistics of the concentration of glyphosate that was found in the various tissues. Now you multiply that, the parts per billion that's shown in the document, just multiply it by the 3.561 trillion molecules per part per billion, and you see how many molecules are present within the tissue. So a part per billion is extremely significant when you're talking about amino acids, because it's one molecule of an amino acid at a time that's getting structurally joined together in the sequence necessary to form the particular protein. So glyphosate works at the molecular level. It destroys biology at the molecular level. It is a synthetic amino acid that does not belong in biology. And we need to get it out of biology immediately. We can proceed to slide number 7. No, let's see.
We are already on 8.
Okay, we're on 8. Okay, we discussed glufosinate and glyphosate and some of the other amino acids that could be misincorporated, showing that it's not just glyphosate that's misincorporated, but there are other amino acids that are well known to incorporate into biology and cause disease. So we are deliberately putting an amino acid, a synthetic amino acid, into our biology. And we are deliberately causing harm to our biology by doing this. Now, continuing to the next slide, what else did Monsanto find? This slide shows the levels in parts per million that were found in the various tissues of the animals. You can convert this to parts per billion and convert it to molecules, and you can see how many trillions upon trillions of molecules were found in these individual tests, individual tissues of these animals, and you can see that is pretty significant.
Is this the 11th slide about bioaccumulation?
Yes.
Okay.
It's 4, group 5, and group 6 animals, and it shows in parts per million the levels of glyphosate that were found in the tissues. And this was from one dose, a single dose. Group 4, 1,000 milligram dose. Group 5 was a 10 milligram single dose. Group 6 was a 10 milligram dose for 14 days before receiving one radio-labeled dose of glyphosate. And then they tracked the radio-labeled glyphosate to get these numbers that are shown in slide number 11. And that slide number 11, that was taken from our paper that we published glyphosate number 4. The data was from Monsanto's trade secret documents. It was a study done by Ridley and Murley in 1988. Okay, slide number 12. We've talked about this, about DuPont finding bioaccumulation of glyphosate and how they used proteolysis to separate glyphosate that had become bioaccumulated in part of the proteins. We know that glyphosate becomes part of the proteins. It's not a mystery. There's no more lab work to do.
Long.
Okay. Well, let me just sum up with the last finding.
Okay.
Knowing that that glyphosate becomes primarily deposited in bone. If we go back to slide number 11.
Yes.
Okay. Notice the bone. Notice group 4.
Yes.
30.6 in the males, 19.7 in the females. That's parts per million deposited from the single oral dose. That's very significant. You'll see that the bone tissue had the highest bioaccumulation of glyphosate of any tissue. Now, getting back to what I discussed earlier here today of extracting gelatin from bones. Gelatin is partially hydrolyzed collagen, which is a major construct of bone. In the gelatin, I found significant quantities of glyphosate. Well, I just released some data to the Centers for Disease Control, to the Food and Drug Administration, to the National Institute of Health, and to the World Health Organization through my U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire. And I looked at vaccines. And I looked at vaccines that use proteins. Proteins like egg protein to grow the vaccines, or gelatin as used in agar to grow the vaccines. Also, gelatin is added as an excipient to vaccines to keep the vaccine in suspension. It's a stabilizer for the vaccine. They put gelatins into vaccines. So I got thinking about that, knowing that what I found in the laboratory with pig bones and skin, and with cow bones, and also from Monsanto's data of the tissues, that my chance of finding glyphosate in vaccines were pretty high, seeing that most of the glyphosate was bioaccumulated in the bone, and that's where we get gelatin from. So I analyzed popular vaccines. I analyzed vaccines from Merck, from Sanofi Pasteur, from GlaxoSmithKline, from Novartis, from Wyeth. I analyzed the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, the diphtheria and tetanus and pertussis vaccine, the hepatitis vaccine, pneumococcus, the influenza vaccine. I also analyzed the shingles vaccine and the chickenpox vaccine. I analyzed multiple vaccines from multiple manufacturers, and I even included multiple laboratories looking at the same vaccines, so that that I wasn't just looking at a single dose. So I developed a lot of data from multiple vaccines, multiple runs from multiple manufacturers, all vaccines involving gelatin and egg proteins. And what did I find? Well, I found that Merck's Zostavax vaccine, which is a shingles vaccine, is contaminated with glyphosate. I found that the Merck MMR2, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, was contaminated with glyphosate. 2.9 parts per billion. Multiply that times the trillion molecules number, and it's really significant how many trillions of molecules are in a dose of that vaccine. I also analyzed the Merck ProQuad measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, which has the varicella vaccine as well. The ProQuad also was contaminated with glyphosate. I analyzed the GlaxoSmithKline Energex B hepatitis vaccine. That vaccine was contaminated with Monsanto's glyphosate. I analyzed another Merck MMR2 vaccine and found 3.7 parts per billion glyphosate contamination in another run. I also reanalyzed the MMR-V vaccine from Merck. That was contaminated. The VeraVax, varicella chickenpox vaccine from Merck, that was contaminated with glyphosate. The Zostavax, the shingles vaccine, you see the commercial on television, get this one done. The shingles vaccine, it's contaminated with glyphosate. I analyzed the Adacel diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis shot vaccine given to children, the Sanofi Pasteur version of the DTaP, that's contaminated with glyphosate. I analyzed GlaxoSmithKline's hepatitis B recombinant vaccine. That's contaminated with glyphosate. I analyzed the flu vaccine, influenza, Fluzone Quad from Sanofi Pasteur, that's grown in chicken eggs. It's contaminated with glyphosate. What else? Another MMR vaccine, 2.963 parts per billion glyphosate. Most of the vaccines I analyzed are contaminated with glyphosate. Now we're exposing the population to this. This is why I sent a letter through my senator, Jane Shaheen, here in New Hampshire, to alert her and for her to alert the Centers for Disease Control, National Institute of Health, and the Food and Drug Administration. I also alerted the United Nations World Health Organization of the Americas, their Washington office. I alerted the director. In the past week, all of these agencies have received my data and a letter that I sent to our senator. I haven't heard back yet. I'm expecting to hear their response, but we have a serious problem in the global vaccine supply.